everyone! I am super excited to share something a little bit different with you guys. Usually I'm on a writing platform, but I figured I'd change it up some and do a video. So last semester I took Late American Lit and we read this poem called Howl by Ginsberg, and I was absolutely enthralled by it. I was a little confused at first, but the more I read it, the more I fall in love with it. And an essay, and I just wanted to share some thoughts on it with you guys. A little bit of a trigger warning though, it does have some foul language, so be prepared. And without further ado, here we go. I saw the best minds of my generation, destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves to the Negro streets at dawn looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo and the machinery of night. Who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high sat up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities contemplating jazz. Who bared their brains to heaven under the L and saw Mohammedan angels staggering on the tenement roofs illuminated. Who passed through universities with radiant cool eyes, hallucinating Arkansas and Blake-like tragedy among the scholars of war. Who were expelled from the academies for crazy and publishing obscene odes on the windows of the skull. Who cowered in unshaven rooms in underwear, burning their money in wastebaskets, listening to the terror through the wall. Who got busted in their pubic beards, returning through Laredo with a bill of marijuana for New York. Who ate fire in paint hotels, or drank turpentine in Paradise Alley, death, or purgatory their torsos night after night. With dreams, with drugs, with waking nightmares, alcohol and cock and endless balls, incomparable blind streets of shattering cloud and lightning in the mind, leaping toward poles of Canada and Patterson, illuminating all the motionless world of time between, peyote solidities of halls, backyard green trees, cemetery dawns, wine drunkenness over the rooftops, store-bought burros of tea-head joyride, neon blinking traffic lights, sun and moon and tree vibrations in the roaring winter dusks of Brooklyn, ash can rannings and kind king light of mind, who changed themselves to subways for the endless ride from Battery to Holy Bronx on Benzedrine until the noise of wheels and children brought them down, shouting mouth racked and bladdered bleak of brain, all drained of brilliance in the drear light of zoo. Who sang all night in submarine light of Bickford's floated out and sat through the stale beer afternoon in desolate Fugazis, listening to the crack of doom on the hydrogen jukebox. Who talked continuously 70 hours from park to pad to bar to Bellevue to museum to the Brooklyn Bridge, a lost battalion of platonic conversationalists jumping off the stoops, off fire escapes, off windowsills, off Empire State, out of moon. Yakety-yakking, screaming, vomiting, whispering facts and memories and anecdotes and eyeball kicks and shocks of hospitals and jails and wars, whose intellects disgorged in total recall for 7 days and nights with brilliant eyes, meat for the synagogue cast on the pavement, who vanished into nowhere, Zen, New Jersey, leaving a trail of ambiguous picture postcards of Atlantic City Hall, suffering eastern sweats and Tangerian bone grindings and migraines of China under junk withdrawal in New York's bleak, unfurnished room, who wandered around and around at midnight until the railroad yard, wondering where to go, and went, leaving no broken hearts, who lit cigarettes in boxcars, racketing through snow toward lonesome farms and grandfather night, who studied Platonius, Poe, St. John of the Cross, telepathy, and Kabbalah, because the cosmos instinctively vibrated at their feet in Kansas, who learned it through the streets of Idaho, seeking visionary Indian angels, who were visionary Indian angels, who thought they were only mad when Baltimore gleamed in supernatural ecstasy, who jumped in limousines with the Chinaman of Oklahoma on the impulse of winter midnight streetlight small-town rain, who lounged hungry and lonesome through Houston seeking jazz or sex or soup, and followed the brilliant Spaniard to converse about America and eternity, a hopeless task, and so took ship to Africa, who disappeared into the volcanoes of Mexico, leaving behind nothing but a shadow of dungarees and the lava and ash of poetry scattered in fireplace Chicago, who reappeared on the West Coast, investigating the FBI in beards and shorts with big mischievous eyes, sexy in their dark skin, passing out incomprehensible leaflets, who burned cigarette holes in their arms, protesting the narcotic tobacco haze of capitalism, who distributed super communist pamphlets in Union Square, weeping and undressing, while the sirens of Los Alamos wailed them down, and wailed down Hall, and the Staten Island Ferry also wailed, who broke down crying in white gymnasiums, naked and trembling before the machinery of other skeletons, who bit detectives in the neck and shrieked with delight in police cars for committing no crime but their own wild cooking pedestrian intoxication, who howled on their knees in the subways and were dragged off the roof waving genitals and manuscripts, who let themselves be fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy, who blew and were blown by those human seraphim, the sailors, cresses of Atlantic and Caribbean love, who bawled in the mornings and the evenings in rose gardens and the grass of public parks and cemeteries, scattering their semen freely to whoever come who may, who hiccuped endlessly, trying to giggle, but wound up with a sob behind a partition in a Turkish bath, when the blonde and naked angel came to pierce them with a sword, who lost their love boys to the three old shrews of fate, the one-eyed shrew of the heterosexual dollar, the one-eyed shrew that winks out of the womb, and the one-eyed shrew that does nothing but sit on our ass instead of the intellectual golden threads of the craftsman loom, who copulated ecstatic and insatiate with a bottle of beer, a sweetheart, a package of cigarettes, a candle, and fell off the bed, and continued along the floor and down the hall, and ended fainting on the wall with a vision of ultimate cunt and coming eluding the last ginsem of consciousness, who sweetened the snatches of a million girls trembling in the sunset, and were red-eyed in the morning, but prepared to sweeten the snatch of the sunrise, flashing buttocks in her barns and naked in the lake, who went out whoring through Colorado in myriad stolen night cars, and secret superhero of these poems, coxswain and Adonis of Denver, joy to the memory of his innumerable lays of girls in empty lots and diner backyards, movie houses, rickety rows, on mountaintops and caves, or with gaunt waitresses in familiar roadside lonely petticoat upliftings, and especially secret gas stations, soliloquiums of Johns, and hometown alleys too, who faded out in vast sordid movies, were shifted in dreams, woke on a sudden Manhattan, and picked themselves up out of basements hung over with heartless decay and horrors of Third Avenue iron dreams, and stumbled up to unemployment offices, who walked all night with their shoes full of blood on the snowbanked docks, waiting for a door in the East River to open to a room full of steam, heat, and opium, who created great suicidal dramas on the apartment of Cliff Banks off the Hudson under the wartime blue floodlight of the moon, and their heads shall be crowned with laurel and oblivion, who ate the lamb stew of the imagination and digested the crab at the muddy bottom of the brewery, who wept at the romance of the streets with their push carts full of onions and bad music, who sat in boxes breathing in the darkness under the bridge and rose up to build a harpsichord in their lofts, who coughed on the 6th floor of Harlem crowned with flame under the tubercular sky surrounded by orange crates of theology, who scribbled all night rocking and rolling over lofty incantations in the yellow morning were stanzas of gibberish, who cooked rotten animals, lung, heart, feet, tail, borscht, and tortillas dreaming of the pure vegetable kingdom, who plunged themselves under meat trucks looking for an egg, who threw watches off of the roof to cast their ballot for eternity outside of time, and alarm clocks fell on their heads every day for the next decade, who cut their wrists 3 times unsuccessfully, gave up and were forced to open antique stores where they thought they were growing old and cried, who were burned alive in their innocent flannel suits on Madison Avenue amid blasts of lead and verse, and the tanked-up clatter of the iron regiments of fashion, and the nitroglycerite shrieks of the fairies of advertising, and the mustard gas of sinister, intelligent editors, or run down by the drunken taxicabs of absolute realty, who jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, this actually happened, and walked away unknown and forgotten into the ghostly days of Chinatown soup, alleyways, and fire trucks, not even one free beer, who sang out of their windows in despair, fell out of the subway window, jumped in a filthy Passaic, leaped on Negroes, cried all over the street, danced in broken wine glasses, barefoot, smashed phonograph records of the nostalgic European 1930s German jazz, finished the whiskey, and threw up groaning in the bloody toilet, moans in their ears and the blast of colossal steam whistles, who barreled down the highways of the past, steering to each other's hot rod Gathel, jail solitude watch, or Birmingham jazz incarnation, who drove cross-country 72 hours to find out if I had a vision, or you had a vision, or he had a vision to find out eternity, who journeyed to Denver, who died in Denver, who came back to Denver and waited in vain, who watched over Denver and brooded and loaned in Denver and finally went away to find out the time, and now Denver is lonesome for her heroes, who fell on their knees in hopeless cathedrals, praying for each other's salvations in light and breasts until the soul illuminated its hair for a second, who crashed through their minds in jail waiting for impossible criminals with golden heads and the charm of realty in their hearts, who sang sweet blues to Alcatraz, who retired to Mexico to cultivate a habit, or Rocky Mount to tender Buddha, or Tangiers to Boise, or Southern Pacific to the Black Locomotive, or Harvard to Narcissus, or Woodlawn to the Daisy Chain or Grave, who demanded sanity trials and accusing the radio of hypnotism, and were left with their insanity in their hands in a hung jury, who threw potato salad at CCNY lectures on deism and subsequently presented themselves on the granite steps of the madhouse with shaven heads and a harlequin speech of suicide, demanding instantaneous lobotomy, and who were instead the concrete void of insulin, metrazole, electricity, hydrotherapy, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, ping-pong, and amnesia, who in humorless protest overturned only one symbolic ping-pong table, resting briefly in catatonia, returning years later truly bald except for a wig of blood and tears and fingers, to the visible madman doom of the wards of the mad towns of the East. Program states, Rocklands, and Greystones, Foated halls, bickering with the echoes of the soul, rocking and rolling in the midnight solitude bench, dolmen realms of love, dream of a life of a nightmare. Bodies turned to stone as heavy as the moon, with mother finally In the last fantastic book flung out of the tenement window. In the last door closed at 4 a.m. In the last telephone slammed at the wall in reply. In the last furnished room emptied down to the last piece of mental furniture. A yellow paper rose twisted on a wire hanger in the closet. And even that, imaginary. Nothing but a hopeful little bit of hallucination. Ah, Carl, you are not safe. I am not safe. And now you're really in the total animal soup of time. And who therefore ran through the icy streets obsessed with the sudden flash of the alchemy of the use of the ellipsis, catalog of variable measure in a vibrating plane, who dreamt and made incarnate gaps in time and space through images juxtaposed, and trapped the archangel of the soul between two visual images, and joined the elemental verbs and set the noun and dash of consciousness together, jumping with sensation of patter, omnipotence, atira dies, to recreate the syntax and measure of poor human prose, and stand before you speechless and intelligent and shaking with shame, rejected yet confessing out the soul to conform to the rhythm of thought in his naked and endless head. The madman bum an angel beat in time unknown, yet putting down here what might be left to say in time come after death, and rose incarnate in the ghostly clothes of jazz, and the gold horn shadow of the band, and blew the suffering of America's naked mind for love into Eli Eli, Lama Lama, Sabati, saxophone cry that shivered the cities down to the last radio, with the absolute heart of the poem of life butchered out of their own bodies, good to eat 1,000 years. What sphinx of semen and aluminum base opened their skulls and ate up their brains and imagination? Moloch, solitude, filth, ugliness, ash cans and unobtainable dollars, children screaming under the stairways, boys sobbing in armies, old men weeping in the parks. Moloch, Moloch, nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless. Mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy judger of men. Moloch the incomprehensible prison. Moloch the cross-boned soulless jailhouse and congress of sorrows. Moloch whose buildings are judgment. Moloch the vast stone of war. Moloch the stunned governments. Moloch whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch whose mind is running money. Moloch whose fingers are 10 armies. Moloch whose breast is a cannibal dynamo. Moloch whose ear is a smoking tomb. Moloch whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows. Moloch whose skyscrapers stand in the long streets, endless Jehovah's. Moloch whose factories dream and croak in the fog. Moloch whose smokestacks and antennae crown the cities. Moloch whose love is endless oil and stone. Moloch whose soul is electricity and banks. Moloch whose poverty is the specter of genius. Moloch whose fate is a cloud of sexless hydrogen. Moloch whose name is the mind. Moloch in whom I sit lonely. Moloch in whom I dream angels. Crazy in Moloch, cocksucker in Moloch, lack love and manless in Moloch. Moloch who entered my soul early, Moloch in whom I am consciousness without a body, Moloch who frightened me out of natural ecstasy, Moloch whom I abandoned, wake up in Moloch, light streaming out of the sky, Moloch, Moloch, robot apartments, invisible suburbs, skeleton treasuries, blind capitals, demonic industries, spectral nations, invincible madhouses, granite cocks, monstrous bombs. They broke their backs, lifting Moloch to heaven. Pavements, trees, radios, tons, lifting the city to heaven which exists and is everywhere about us. Visions, omens, hallucinations, miracles, ecstasies, gone down the American River. Dreams, adorations, illuminations, religions, the whole boatload of sensitive bullshit. Breakthroughs, over the river, flips and crucifixions, gone down the flood. Highs, epiphanies, despairs, 10 years, animal screams and suicides, minds, new loves, mad generation, down on the rocks of time, real holy laughter in the river, they saw it all. The wild eyes, the holy yells, they bade farewell, they jumped off the roof, to solitude, waving, crying, carrying flowers, down to the river, into the street. Carl Solomon, I'm with you in Rockland, where you're madder than I am. I'm with you in Rockland, where you must feel very strange. I'm with you in Rockland, where you imitate the shade of my mother. I'm with you in Rockland, where you've murdered your 12 secretaries. I'm with you in Rockland, where you laugh at this invisible humor. I'm with you in Rockland, where you are great writers on the same dreadful typewriter. I'm with you in Rockland, where your condition has become serious and is reported on the radio. I'm with you in Rockland, where the faculties of the skull no longer admit the worms of the senses. I'm with you in Rockland, where you drink the tea of the breast of the splinters of the Utica. I'm with you in Rockland, where you pun on the bodies of your nurses, the harpies of the Bronx. I'm with you in Rockland, where you scream in a straitjacket that you're losing the game of the actual ping-pong of the abyss. I'm with you in Rockland, where you bang on the catatonic piano. The soul is innocent and immortal. It should never die ungodly in an armed madhouse. I'm with you in Rockland, where 50 more shocks will never return your soul to its body again, from its pilgrimage to a cross in the void. I'm with you in Rockland, where you accuse your doctors of insanity and plot the Hebrew socialist revolution against the fascist national Golgotha. I'm with you in Rockland, where you split the heavens of Long Island and resurrect your living human Jesus from the superhuman tomb. I'm with you in Rockland, where the 25,000 mad comrades all together singing the final stanzas of the Internationale. I'm with you in Rockland, where we hug and kiss the United States under our bed sheets, the United States that coughs all night and won't let us sleep. I'm with you in Rockland, where we wake up electrified out of the coma by our own souls' airplanes roaring over the roof. They've come to drop angelic bombs. The hospital illuminates itself. Imaginary walls collapse. Oh, skinny legions run outside. Oh, starry spangled shock of mercy, the eternal roar is here. Oh, victory, forget your underwear, we are free. I am with you in Rockland. In my dreams, you walk dripping from a sea journey on the highway, across America in tears to the door of my cottage in the western night. That, my friends, is the wonderful poem written by Allen Ginsberg in San Francisco from the years of 1955 to 1956. So that reading was courtesy of the Poetry Foundation, and now I'd like to read a little bit of context and analysis of my own about Allen Ginsberg's poem. So here we go. So, Obscenity and Free Expression, Ginsberg's Howl revolutionized the American literary canon. Originally written as a private piece to be shared among friends, Allen Ginsberg's Howl quickly became an object of scrutiny when San Francisco Lights Books decided to publish the poem. Shortly after publication, the poem caught eye of the law and was tried for obscenity. The three-part poem, with its repetitive language and abstract lines, is initially confusing to the reader, who may be shocked by the uncensored tongue that Ginsberg uses. A close reading depicts a generation of broken souls in the first portion, the symbolic use of Moloch the fire god in the second portion, and an homage to the mentally institutionalized in the final portion. The raw, uncensored language in Ginsberg's poem tasked critics to ban its publication due to obscenity. However, this language is necessary for the integrity of the poem. Without it, the poem loses its meaning and its powerful message. Therefore, Allen Ginsberg's Howl should be celebrated as a revolutionary text that liberated a generation, set precedent for obscene texts, and redefined the American literary canon. Excuse me. A glimpse into the time period and generation serves as a fitting preface to the trial and the masterpiece of Howl. Allen Ginsberg begins his poem with one of the best lines of American literature. I saw the best minds of my generation, destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. Line 1. The generation can be described as those who returned from the Vietnam War frightened, disillusioned, and seeking an escape from the horrors of war that were pointless to some, who drank, smoked, and partied to forget the suffering of war, who shrugged off the aftermath of World War II and had the baby boom, an economy boom, a boom for life, boom, 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 who dreamed the American dream of a white picket fence with the 2 kids, dog Rover, perfect housewife, and steady job, who stood behind good old American values and outlawed open sexuality, homosexuality, questionable morality for those who snorted drugs, drank alcohol, and lived life on the wild side, who had the, quote, absolute heart of the poem butchered out of their own bodies. Line 78. The souls that Ginsberg writes about were desperate for a more abundant life, yet the generation he describes is plagued by many demons in the never-sleeping city. Among those howling alongside Ginsberg were Jack Kerouac, Peter Orlovsky, butchered those names, sorry, Herbert Hunk, and Neil Cassidy, all writers and men who were open with their sexuality. They formed the Beat Generation, an era of writers who rhythmically beat their story as if on a drum, an era beat down from the war and the economy. It is no secret that Ginsberg and his community lived the outlawed counterculture lifestyle of sex, drugs, alcohol, and homosexuality. Howl is presented to readers in its raw form, unapologetic and authentic to the counterculture and life of Allen Ginsberg at the time. He writes of drug dealers, subway transits, protesters, lovers, and gays all out on the streets howling of humanity in different pitches. The poem's beat-like rhythm takes on a life of itself as it is read aloud and forces the reader to continue forward, howling the stories of humanity amid the abrupt appearances of cock and endless balls, cocksucker, ultimate cunt, and other sensitive bullshit that might muzzle the reader. Nightmare of Moloch, Moloch the loveless, mental Moloch, Moloch the heavy judge of men, from line 81. Moloch the paper pusher seeking justice, or is it injustice? Moloch prim and proper, Moloch who preys on the imagination of others, Moloch whose square tendencies are frustrated by the round patterns that do not match the square mold, Moloch the fiery god who takes works of art as sacrifice to the Constitution, quote, gone down the American river, dreams, adorations, illuminations, religions, the whole load of sensitive bullshit. Lines 89 and 90. Symbolically presented as Moloch the fire god that Ginsberg references in his poem. The prosecution served as a fiery machine who took Howl as sacrifice to examine the definition of obscenity and evaluate the necessary importance of contemporary art and literature. Profane phrases such as the ones mentioned at the end of Part 1 often elicit a shocked response from the reader and prompted a trial by the people of California. The case, whose primary defendant during the trial was City Lights Books publisher Lawrence Ferlinghetti, was settled in lower courts. However, the court's ruling changed the American literary canon forever. Prosecution brought suit arguing that City Lights Books, quote, willfully and lewdly printed and published obscene and indecent writings, Tourette, Howl, and other poems. People versus Ferlinghetti. End quote. It followed on the heels of the recently decided bookmark case, Roth versus United States, which outlined obscenity and First Amendment rights. People versus Ferlinghetti used this precedent and decision to define obscenity and judge the public legality of the publication of Howl. An allegedly obscene text would be protected under the First Amendment if the ideas, quote, the ideas had even the slightest redeeming social importance. Unorthodox ideas, controversial ideas, even ideas hateful to the prevailing climate of opinion have the full protection, unless excludable because they encroach upon the limited area of more important interests. Roth versus United States, end quote. Furthermore, obscene texts must, quote, safeguard the protection of freedom of speech and press for material which does not treat sex in a manner appealing to prurient interest, end quote, as judged by the average person. That is, speech that does not invoke lustful thoughts must be protected by the Constitution per Roth versus United States. Traditionally, however, obscene texts were seen without redeeming social importance. The prosecution, then, is tasked with proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Howl does not have, quote, redeeming social importance or takes a prurient interest, as decided by the average person. On the surface, it would appear to a reader that Howl is certainly an obscene text with an overwhelming presence of sex permeating throughout the poem. In the first part of the poem specifically, Ginsberg writes of cock and endless balls and is preoccupied with the idea of sex in which the anonymous Who comes in search of the city, roams the city in search of a fix. The courts were especially concerned with an explicit passage alluding to gay sex in which they were, quote, dragged off of the roof, waving genitals and manuscripts, who let themselves be fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy, who blew and were blown by those human seraphim, the sailors, caresses of Atlantic and Caribbean love, end quote, from lines 34 and 36. Arguably, this is the most explicit sexual passage of the entire poem. Ginsberg himself had reservations about this section of the poem for fear of his father's opinions of the blunt homosexual reference. However, Ginsberg regarded Howl as such an intimately personal piece that he decided to keep this passage in the work. It served as an inverse to society's expectations. Where when one expects pain, he writes of joy, a celebration of his gayness. The reference to Atlantic and Caribbean love are synonymous to Greek love, a more open, accepting love and sexuality, particularly for same-sex love. The passage is inherently gay and caused an uproar in the 1950s courtroom. Furthermore, Ginsberg viewed that line as, quote, an acknowledgement of homosexual joy, a breakthrough in a sense of public statement, feelings, emotions, and attitudes from the movie Howl, end quote. The prosecution argued that passages such as this were obscene, without social importance, and certainly lewd or invoking images of sex or repressed homosexual lust. A previous court decision, however, invalidated the prosecution's argument. While certain parts of the poem may be argued as explicit, a work can only be determined as obscene if it is construed as a whole. It's from Weplow. This point applied to Howl specifically in the case. Quote, the theme of Howl represents unorthodox and controversial ideas. Coarse and vulgar language is used in treatment, and sex acts are mentioned. But unless the book is entirely lacking in social importance, it cannot be held obscene. That's from the judge's opinion in People versus Ferlinghetti. It is the burden of the defense to prove that Howl as a whole is socially important. It was argued that the poem represented a sincere effort by the author to present a social picture, and the language used was relevant to the theme. It comments on the nature of society and represents the vibrant underground counterculture of America in the 1950s. The poem brings to light social issues that were largely ignored during the time period: same-sex love, poverty, drugs, and more. Without Howl, the lifestyle of an entire community of people would be banished from literary existence. In a more abstract sense, Howl is not the promotion of homosexuality, but of, quote, frankness about any subject. A few people are frank about homosexuality in public, it breaks the ice. Then people are free to be frank about anything, and that's socially useful. End quote. That's from the movie Howl. The poem then serves as an icebreaker for society to frankly discuss the issues prominent today. So the progressive court decision in favor of Howl expanded the freedoms of speech and allowed Ginsberg to join the center stage as one of the greats in American contemporary literature. Quote, I'm with you in Rockland, where you're madder than I am. I'm with you in Rockland, where you laugh at this invisible humor. I'm with you in Rockland, where we are great writers on the same dreadful typewriter. End quote. I'm with you in Rockland, where we are no longer shackled by the confines of proper language and the art of being approved. I'm with you in Rockland, where I bare my soul for all to see. I'm with you in Rockland, where we rejoice over the victories in the present and appreciate the struggle of the past. Prior to the Howl decision, the American literary canon was composed of the classics, works of art that were elitist or in the vernacular and discussed great topics. For ages, critics have raced to answer the question, what is good art, and have answered differently as time progressed. Good art, or the accepted American literary canon, has a storied past. They are treasured throughout history and are regarded as high art. Originally, the canon exclusively included works in the classical languages of Greek or Latin, then slowly transitioned to French, Middle English, and more recently, proper English. Ginsberg changed the contemporary American canon to include the vulgar, everyday language to expose the authentic lives of authors and readers alike. Ginsberg's choice to write unabashedly, curse in the vernacular, and write of sex were revolutionary during the 1950s and changed the accepted literary canon. Freedom of expression was granted to writers. The decision allowed writers to be frank and write about whatever they wanted in any way they wished. The court decision, People v. Ferlinghetti, gifted the world with Ginsberg's Howl and allowed freedom for writers to write uniquely, abstractly, in their own tongue, and address the world as they view it. The progressive court decision, People v. Ferlinghetti, discredited Howl as an obscene novel and granted First Amendment rights to its author and publisher. The trial itself found Howl to have, quote, redeeming social importance, which proved it to be a work that is important to understanding sex, life, mental illness, and more. Thanks to the court's ruling, Howl revolutionized the American literary canon to include new works of self-expression that covered a myriad of topics and fostered an audience for innovation, acceptance, and a new literary tradition. And for that, I am thankful. So thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to hear you guys keep on howling. Thank you.